This is the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. Here's Robert Kiyosaki.
Hello. Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. Very special show today. Important show. Probably the reason the Rich Dad Company was founded. August 15th, 1971, a man named Tricky Dick Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. And most people don't even remember it because he announced it during a TV show called Bonanza. So I think most people were watching Bonanza rather than Tricky Dick. And but that 1971 change, August 15th, 1971, the 50th anniversary is coming up in a few days. So I thought we'd commemorate that and explain what happened. But since I'm the oldest guy on this show, I'll give you a little history of what happened before 1971. Back in the 1950s, people didn't invest in stocks. I remember my rich dad's having an employee who was playing the stock market. And Rich Dad said, that guy's a gambler. You know, back then it was a thing called the Nifty 50. And that's all he talked about was a Nifty 50. Now, this is the difference. My rich dad was an entrepreneur, and entrepreneurs don't need to invest in stocks because they create their own assets. So that was in the 1950s, and if anybody did anything, they saved money. And prior to 1971, it was really smart to save money because after 1971, they started printing it. So back in prior to 1971, when I was a kid, people saved money, gamblers were in the stock market, and people bought bonds because bonds were safe because they weren't printing money. And I remember as a kid, I had a little bank that said Bishop Bank, which today is First Hawaiian Bank. And I would save my little pennies and all that, take it down there, and I put it in my little passbook, and I got, 3% or whatever it was. Wasn't much. And then we bought U.S. savings bonds. So I still remember the numbers, not good at numbers, but I do like dollar signs in front of them. If you put $18.75 into a savings bond, in 10 years, you got $25. Now, it didn't excite me because 10 years when you're only 10 years old is a long time. So I said, oh boy, in 10 years, I got $25, like somehow it didn't register for me. But my rich dad kept saying, that's the smart thing to do. So Rich Dad had bonds and he built his own assets. He was a real estate guy because, as you guys know, as Ray Kroc of McDonald's says, the purpose of a business is to buy real estate. So he set up businesses. He'd buy real estate and he put it in. He had residential property, which my poor dad called slums. And what they were basically large tracts of land that he would put Quonset huts on, because Quonset huts was military surplus after World War II. And then my job and Richard's son and our job was to go collect rent. If you want a financial education, go collect rent. Until you hear more bullshit than you ever hear in your whole life. And when I talked to Donald Trump, he says that was one of the best experiences his father ever gave him, was to go collect rent. And you hear more stuff. So anyway, after 1971, they started printing money. And that's when, 1972, I started buying gold because I understand what's going on, that 87 was a big stuff. What happened in 71 was that. 74 was the ERISA, Employee Retirement Income Security Act, which then forced everybody into the stock market. So I remember my rich dad saying, those frickin' guys, they're putting all these people who are idiots into the stock market. They don't even know what they're doing. And so the whole retirements were now based upon a thing called a 401k, also called a DC, a defined contribution plan. And certain employees, like from Ford Motor Company and the government, had defined benefit plans. That was 74 was a major change. Again, 71, 74. And then came the 87 stock market crash, and a few people understood that it wasn't as understood the thing about gambling. And, I was watching this. Then came the Glass-Steagall. They repealed Glass-Steagall, I think around 1995 or something like that. Clinton did that one. And what Glass-Steagall did is it made commercial banks and investment banks the same. You could gamble. And there was so much corruption that came when you had investment banks and regular savings banks getting together. So they started putting savings of the savers into the stock market. That's what the repeal of Glass-Steagall did. Then we had the crash of 2000, which they called the dot-com crash. Then came 2008, and they call it a subprime mortgage crash, and they blamed the poor people for the crash, but it wasn't the poor people who did it. Again, it was Wall Street, the Treasury, and the Fed. And then they never fixed the problem. They never fixed the problem. And all they did was print more money. So 1971 continued on in mass after 2008. And today in 2021, I'll give you a number, they started coming up with things called quantitative easing. And what that quantitative easing was to do was to keep money into the economy, because it was like this huge hot air balloon going in the sky, that if that hot air balloon came down, the little gondola was you and me. So if that gondola, that big balloon didn't stay in the sky and it started to empty, the crash would be the little gondola below it, and that's us. We'd get crushed. So what happened was, I still remember they came, I forgot which Fed chairman it was, says QE3 is going to fix it. This is the bazooka. We're going to print so much money that will fix the problem forever. So in QE3, they were putting, I think, $80 billion a month into the economy. $80 billion. Today, it's $120 billion. They're trying to keep this hot air balloon in the sky, because this balloon, and hanging below it is you and me. So that's where we are, and that's why the 50th anniversary is coming up. And if that balloon comes down, it's going to be a big one. So this special edition of Rich Dad Radio is the 50th anniversary of Tricky Dick taking the U.S. dollar off the gold standard. And then, like I said, it happened in 1971. Savers became the biggest losers. So I never saved money anymore. I saved gold over Bitcoin, but not money. And what happened in 1971, debt became money and taxes. Because if you understand how money works, to print money, you have to have taxes to offset it. So it's debt and taxes. So today we have very special dear friends for years and years and years. Ken McElroy, who's our specialty on debt, and Tom Wheelwright, who's our expert on how not to pay taxes using debt. And Kim. So let Kim's, because Kim, these guys have made us frickin' millions of dollars, haven't they?
Yes, they have. Yes, they have. We're very grateful to both of them. Thank you very much. And I pretty sure when Nixon 50 years ago, I'm sure they never envisioned what it would be like today, but 50 years ago, he said it was temporary. He said it was temporary, just like COVID lockdown was temporary. So if I understand correctly, Robert, by taking the U.S. dollar off the gold standard, also gave way to the dollar just devaluing over time, correct?
It got worse than that, because if that didn't fix the banking system, it's a thing called the fractional reserve system. And there's all this stuff called Griffin's Dilemma and all this stuff that I studied nobody cares about. But today there's a euro dollar system. In other words, not the euro. There's more dollars overseas that are U.S. dollars, and they're doing the same thing. What it is it's called the fractional reserve. You save $10, they can lend out 100. That's the system. So there's more U.S. dollars floating out there, and nobody knows how big the problem is. Sorry about that. That answers the question, but it got bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like Frankenstein's monster. Yeah. Happy 50th anniversary.
Well, welcome, Tom, and welcome, Ken. Always great to have you guys on the show.
Always good to be here. What a great show to be on.
Yeah. Well, and Robert, you said when that happened, that when savers become losers and debtors got rich, so the more debt we have, the better off we are, because that debt is cheap.
Right. I mean, what happened after 2000? I remember Kenny and I were laughing because, I was at Safeway, and the Safeway checkout girl, this is prior to 2007 or 2006, our vacancies in our apartments were going up because everybody was becoming homeowners. They could buy a house for a ninja loan, no income, no job. If they fogged a mirror, they got a house. They were just so desperate because what happened in 1971, if people stopped borrowing, it stopped. You had to have debt. So today we have student loan debt, credit card debt. Everybody wants to buy new cars and all this because debt became the engine of the economy. Tom, is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And taxes are the way you pay for debt.
Most people only think of debt as bad debt. They only think of it as bad. There's actually very good debt if you know what you're doing. No,
but that's the key. Like Dave Ramsey says, live debt free, and I agree with him. If you're an idiot, don't borrow money. But the reason we have Kenny and Tom on Kenny's books teach you how to borrow money, and Tom's books tell you how not to pay taxes. This is the irony of it all. Is twice a year we have to call Kenny and say, Kenny, we need more debt. Kenny, why is that?
Well, you said it in the intro, Robert. I mean, you kind of just skipped over it because you're so well read. But I think when you said debt became money, I think that a lot of people have a stigma around debt. It's kind of a bad word, and for many it is. Credit card debt. That's kind of what gets a lot of the media attention. But we're borrowing, as you know, from banks at 3% or less. And we already know just in the last few months, inflation is reported finally way higher than we're borrowing. So why wouldn't you borrow other people's money in the form of debt? Because you're actually, it's like taking money from people and fixing it at 3, and inflation's your friend right now. So you're crazy, as you know, to save money because your purchasing power on that money is eroding each and every month, and it's starting to show up in the numbers.
And Kim and I panic when Kenny doesn't have a deal because without Kenny, we don't borrow money. So, Tom, why is that important that we borrow money? We go into debt with Kenny, Kim and I.
Well, because you need assets. Building assets is how you reduce your taxes. And the more debt you have, the more assets you can acquire. So it's all about the assets.
And then on top of that is that we have the assets, then 3 things kick into place: amortization, appreciation, appreciation, and they're all tax-free.
That's right. That's right.
So the whole system was happening after 1971. As I said, debtors became the winners and savers became the losers. And if you can understand that, that's why this 50th anniversary is so important. And I still hear people saying, save money. Tom, what do you
remember as a kid, Robert, I remember as a kid when my parents paid off their house, how happy they were, because back then it made sense. They bought the house in the 50s and the 60s, the house I grew up in. I remember to this day when my dad and my mom, and they hugged in the kitchen and they were like, we paid off the house, because it meant something at the time, but that all changed.
So Tom, give us the technical side or the internal revenue side on debt. Why do they want us to be in debt? Why they incentivize us?
Well, so what they do is they say, look, the more assets you have, the less taxes you pay. I mean, that's rule number 1. The more assets you have, the less taxes you pay. They want, the federal government wants you to put your money into productive assets like housing, like commercial real estate, like energy, agriculture, business. All of these things are productive assets, and the more assets you have, then for every dollar of asset you buy, you get a dollar deduction from your tax. So if you make $1 million, you need to borrow money so that you can buy $5 million of assets, so that you can offset that $1 million of income. Otherwise, you're going to pay $400,000 on that $1 million of income. So what the government's saying is, look, if you borrow money and buy more assets, you'll pay less tax.
And what's funny is about twice a year, I'm on the phone with Kenny begging, Kenny, I need more debt. Right? I mean, you have a lot of guys like that, Kenny, right?
Yeah. I mean, but I'm in the same boat as, I mean, we all are, we all know that debt is your friend. Why wouldn't you borrow other people's money, buy real estate, and then have other people pay it off for you? And then you get the tax write-offs, so you get income, plus you get the tax benefits for that.
Can I add one more thing? Tom, this is it. If we sell our property, if we flip it, we have a tax consequence, don't we?
If you do flipping, you do. You have regular ordinary income if you're a flipper.
So if I borrow out the equity, what is that?
That's not taxable because debt's not taxable.
Yeah. Kim, is that what we do?
That is what we do. And I wanted to say to Kenny's point, I bet there's a lot of people watching this right now that are going, oh yeah, that's good. But the prices are too high today. So there's no deals out there. And we just closed on a deal, a few weeks ago. So,
Kim, I'm an accountant, so I always look at the numbers and I'm going, if the money that's coming in is more than the money that's going out, who cares?
But the other thing,
there are a lot of opportunities out there, even though markets are kind of crazy right now, if you know what you're looking for.
But on the 50th anniversary, I think this is really funny. Like Bezos, Branson, and all those guys are riding the rocket ships. And Kim just bought her Lear, what, 60?
Right.
So Tom, why was buying her own Learjet? It's not a rocket ship, but it's pretty fast.
It actually is a rocket ship.
So how was that a tax break for Kim?
Well, it's actually an asset, right? So what I've noticed about you and Kim is you guys never buy a liability. You always buy an asset. So you're always buying something that's going to produce income. Well, what the government says is, and this is true in every country, if you buy an asset that produces income, then you can write off the asset. If it doesn't produce income, you can't. So if you bought a plane and just used it for personal purposes, you wouldn't get to write that off. But because your plane makes money, you can write that off.
Our plane makes money because it's in a charter fleet of a company. So it's used as a charter plane regularly.
And it's exactly like the properties we buy with Kenny. They're in a rental fleet too.
Yep.
So what you're understanding is true capitalism here. So we come back with big finishing up, final words from these people on the 50th anniversary of Tricky Dick Nixon's taking the dollar off the gold standard. It's just when the stock market is all-time highs, real estate is all-time highs, bond market is all-time highs, and the big balloon is in the sky, and they keep filling it more and more with hot air. We'll be right back. Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about the 50th anniversary of Tricky Dick Nixon taking the dollar off the gold standard August 15th, 1971. And how it changed the world. And then in 1974, everybody they were pushed into this thing called a 401k. And back in 1971, let me remind you, it was smart to save. There was a thing called the magic of compounding interest. I actually bought savings bonds because it was the smart thing to do. And my rich dad says he says people were in the stock market were gamblers. They called it the Nifty 50. Those are the big stocks of the time. And then Tricky Dick took it off the gold standard, and it just got worse and worse and worse. I think the biggest one was repealed the Glass-Steagall Act, which allowed mom and pop banks to merge with investment banks. It just went to this big casino. And now we're sitting at the biggest bubble in world history, I think. It's never been this big. I'll tell you a quick story. I was watching the Milwaukee Bucks play the Phoenix Suns. I was sitting at the bar at Tommaso's, Kim, and there was a woman there with her husband. She says, I'm a realtor. I go, oh my God. And she's sitting there with her accountant. And I'm going, oh my God. And she says, you want to buy some real estate? I said, so I pointed to our building behind Tommaso's, Kim. I said, that's real estate. That's a real investment. We've owned it for 25 years. We're never going to sell it. We don't pay taxes on it. We make a lot of money on it. And so their accountant is sitting there. So this is the tax problem. She's been a realtor for 5 years in the bull market going up. So she's made a lot of money on commissions as she started flipping. She started buying and flipping. So now they have severe tax problems because they haven't paid any taxes. Oh, God. And so the accountant, this big fat guy eating his cannoli. And so I wish you were there, Tom. So I asked him, I said, what do you recommend? I mean, you want his answer? Flip more. And
wow.
Kenny, the classic line was, real estate never comes down. What do you think, Kenny?
Until it does.
Right.
Yeah, of course it does. Yeah, I mean, it's the classic buy low, sell high if you can. And of course, we don't sell high. We buy low, cash flow, and keep and reap. Harvest the money that the government allows.
The thing, when you do it your way, you're not paying any taxes. She's got this huge tax problem because she keeps selling. She keeps realizing the income, and you hold it. And then when you refinance it, that's still the same money coming out, but you still own the asset and you're not paying any tax.
So she can't get out of her tax problem because she keeps flipping, which creates more of a tax problem.
Yeah, she's just creating more tax problems. She's compounding her tax problem is what she's doing, where if she would use some debt and buy some real assets, then she could eliminate her tax problem.
Well, Robert, I'm having drinks. I'm not having drinks with my accountant. I'm having drinks with the broker to try to figure out what to buy, like cash flows.
So Tom, I talked to the accountant. He was his cannoli. He was almost as big as his cannoli, but he says they don't know any better. That was his answer. He says I can't really advise them if they don't know any better. What would you say to that, Tom, as a accountant?
Well, it's the accountant's job to educate their client. This is why we're here, right? I mean, our job is to educate, and that's the accountant's job, is to educate. So if his clients are uneducated, that's because he hasn't educated them. And my guess is he doesn't understand it, because what the great thing about debt is you not only do you get the deduction for the money you put into the asset, but you have the deduction for the money the bank puts into the asset. So, you've got this huge compounding effect to lower your taxes, where what they're doing is they're continuing to increase their taxes by flipping.
Any comments there, Kim?
Yeah, well, I have a question then. So they're going to keep printing money. They're going to keep propping up the stock market until they can't anymore. So what's a person to do? What do you do today?
Well, I'm still finding cash flowing deals, Kim.
You're still finding them, Kenny?
Oh, yeah. In fact, like literally right after this call here, we're on an investment committee call. We're looking at 6 to 8 deals a week. Obviously, we don't buy anything that doesn't cash flow or doesn't have a value add. Right. So
wait. Kenny, that's I think the key question. Kenny doesn't just flip the property. He improves the property. Would you say that's true?
Yeah. If it doesn't have a story, I'm not going to buy something and hope it goes up. That's not, I do what, as Tom knows, we call it forced equity. So like the last deal that we just bought, as you guys know, you guys are in it. It's a $20 million value add. Now I know that sounds like a lot to a lot of your folks. What that means,
Kenny, a value add, a $20 million value.
What that means is that there was $1 million of NOI growth, net operating income growth inside. And so think of anything that's mismanaged or not managed well, or maybe the ownership doesn't see. So you go in and you inject some money and you create more value. So you improve the property, you increase the rents, you manage your expenses better. And on that one property, it's going to take a couple of years. We're going to get to about $1 million more in revenue than we had when we bought it. And so that's what investors buy into. And if you take a look and you bring that property to the bank should value that. We bought it around 80 million. The bank should value that at around 100 million. Now, it's possible that I'm off. It's possible that I'm a little bit wrong, but I will tell you this. we're definitely going to increase the cash flow. That's for sure. We just don't know what the value is going to be. We think it's going to be somewhere between 96 and 100 million. That's what I'm talking about. So we have cash flow and we have value add.
So Kenny, what was the total package from the purchase price and the value add?
So we're somewhere in the low 70s to buy both properties at 648 units, and they were next door to each other. And so we're combining operations, we're renovating the property, and then we're adding washers and dryers. So all of those things equal to about $100 to $200,000 per month in rent growth, based on our improvements in putting washers and dryers in the units. That's going to be around $1 million in additional cash flow that we hope to get somewhere after year 2. And so what happens is you then bring that back to the bank and you say, hey, we bought it, the net operating income was here, and now it's $1 million higher. What's it worth now? And then we put more debt on it. And that's a cash out refinance. Value add has cash flow, has value add, and then we that's how we get the investor money back.
And it doesn't have to be a 600 unit property.
No.
It could be a single family house. You do the same formula.
I love the house hacking. A lot of people, I have a ton of friends that start by they what's called house hacking. They basically get a free home. So you take a duplex, you buy it, you live in one side, you rent out the other side. It covers all your expenses, and you're living tax-free and for free on the other side, while the people living next door to you are paying off your place. And then I literally just met last week with a young kid that I've been mentoring. He's 24 years old. He just did a cash out refi and took $138,000 out. He did that 2 years ago when I mentored him, and I met with him. He's like, hey, I got $138,000 now. That was because the market went up. That's a gift. That's not strategy, and that's not something that he could have predicted.
Tom, is that tax-free money?
Well, it is tax-free money. And what I'm thinking about when Ken's talking about all the washers and dryers and all that kind of stuff, that's all tax deductions as well. So not only is the purchase price deductible through depreciation, but all of those improvements that Ken makes, those are deductible, and they're just additional tax benefits to his investor.
Yeah. So I'm going to just say this. What would you guys say? How would you prepare for a crash? Kim, what are you doing to prepare for a crash?
Well, we've got gold, we've got silver, we've got properties, we've got a place to run to. But basically, we're buying tangible assets: gold, silver, real estate. We've got some Bitcoin.
We're buying things that people have to use. It's like owning food. People always buy food. Kenny, what are you going to do for a crash? Buy more.
Well, there's in addition to what Kim was talking about, and of course, this is what we all talk about every single week. So, but what we're trying to do is we want to keep some dry powder or some cash to be able to buy things after they. And so, it's a fine balance of how much cash because of inflation. But I will tell you this: in every crash, people move to rentals. And so, what's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years for sure, it's already starting, is we're moving more toward a renter nation. So whether you like it or not, rents are going to have to go up because there's only a limited supply of rentals right now, and people are going to pour out after these forbearance issues. And, all this stuff starts to correct. They're going to pour into rentals just like they did in 2008. And that's what created the rent growth. So that's happening, whether you sit back or not, or whether you're involved or not. And so we're trying to have liquidity and buy rentals in places where we think people are going to be.
So wouldn't you say that Nixon did you a favor back in 1971, 50 years ago?
Yeah, I would thank him if I could.
So once they have to start paying their mortgages again, a lot of people are not going to be able to, correct?
There's millions of people right now, Kim, and there's so much great data, like on Black Knight. There's a couple websites that house all this. So you can actually go look and say, what markets are the most severely delinquent right now on their mortgages. And by the way, Hawaii is up there. at the in the top 5, and so you can actually see which ones.
Tom, what advice you had to prepare for the balloon coming down?
It's like Kim said, it's all about assets, right? And then when you add a good asset, produces good cash flow. So it's, people are afraid of debt because they don't believe in the asset. If you understand the asset like Ken does, Ken and Kim do so much work learning about real estate and understanding the assets that they'll borrow all the money in the world because they're confident in the asset that you're going to continue to get cash flow. So it's real assets. It's real producing assets that always they keep going even when the market's down. One thing I want to say about what Ken was saying about rental is that the U.S. government has, for many, 50 years, they have supported the housing industry. And that is the single-family home housing industry. And they started to pull back from that. They started a number of years ago reducing the amount of mortgage interest that you could deduct on your personal residence. There's no limit on how much you can deduct if you are a multifamily that you're renting out. And so that keeps coming down. And what that means is that there's fewer and fewer incentives to buying home. And now they're trying to make renters equal to homeowners. And so you're just going to push more people into rentals.
And if it crashes, they're going to print more money, right?
That's what they always do.
Yeah.
And one thing too, Kenny,
So thank you, Tricky Dick Nixon, 50 years ago. Go ahead, Kim.
one thing Kenny said another time, if you do have a home or you do have rental property, good idea to fix your interest rates, correct? Because if those interest rates go up.
Yes.
Yeah. One of the things now, not saying it's going to happen, but one of the tools in the Federal Reserve's toolbox is to use interest rates to hedge inflation. And we know that we have very high reported inflation, and they've hinted that they might increase rates. So you want to fix them now.
Well, that's called forward guidance. The real interest rate, according to John Williams of Shadow Stacks, is 14.5. That's inflation today. But Who knows if it's real or not. Final word is this, is that every bubble, like in 2008, the Safeway checkout girl gave me her card. So our neighbor, Scott Shermer, who is also a real estate guy, this guy is a mega big, he is a developer, Kenny. He builds, he takes down large tracts of lands and puts in subdivisions and all. He's in Idaho right now. He's creaming it. He says he can't believe how much money he's making. So he and I went out to dinner and I said, "Are you into bonds?" He goes, "Nope." "Are you into stocks?" He goes, "Nope." See, real estate guys or real capitalists create their own assets. If you understand that, you'll understand why we're not in the stock market or the bond market and all that, although we make money off it indirectly. So I was talking about the Safeway checkout girl, and the town was booming. Phoenix, Arizona's booming. You can't get a, the stimmy checks are going out. People are happy. But this is the lesson. The bull in a bull market always goes up the stairs slowly, and the bear goes out the window. When it comes down fast. Or that old saying goes, well, how did I go bankrupt? Well, in 2 steps, slowly at first, then suddenly. So Scott and I can't even get into a restaurant. We have all the money in the world. We can't get in. So we go to this one restaurant right not too far from our office here, Kenny and Tom and Kim. And we walk in and everybody's in evening gowns. I went, this is Arizona. Nobody wears evening gowns, Scott looked at me and says, the end is near.
Yeah, well, you guys, we're all seeing it. When people are bidding 50, 150 over list, and there's there's a massive bubble being created. There's some articles that just came out in the last few days that really indicate that we might be seeing some serious softness. Because the appraisals are not coming in even near what people are buying. Yeah. So they have to come up with the extra cash, and These should be taps on the shoulders for you guys. This is not how you buy real estate.
Hey, would you send me that article?
Yeah, I'll send it to you right now.
So this is so much fun. It's like the bull goes up the stairs, the bear goes out the window. How did you go broke? Slowly at first, then suddenly. And I think it's coming again, and it's a good time. So we want to say thank you. Happy birthday to 1971. This is 2021. And it makes capitalists who know what they're doing very rich. So I thank Kenny and Tom, please get their books. I mean, if you really want to understand real estate, you must have Kenny's book and Tom's books because it's debt and taxes. Final word, Kim?
I just want to say thank you, guys. Thank you for all you've done for Robert and myself, because we love to hang out with the smart guys, and we love to hang out with the people that are making things happen. And you've brought us a ton of success, and very grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kenny, final words?
Well, this is not going to end anytime soon. So, you guys can fight it or you can move with it. It's definitely happening. They're going to continue to print money. They're going to continue to bail people out. We're going to continue to have inflation, and you need to get into fixed rate debt if you're going to survive.
Correct. Final words, Tom?
Well, it really is debt and taxes. That's what make taxes go down. Robert, you and Kim would pay massive taxes if it weren't for the amount of debt that Kenny goes out and gets and produces huge cash flow. So it's, it really does come down to the assets, cash flow, debt, and taxes.
Yep. And so everybody be very careful. We're the top of a bubble. When people are wearing gold evening gowns in Phoenix, where the end is near. Thank you all for listening to the Rich Dad Radio Show.
All right.
We'll see you next time. Bye.
Good seeing you guys.
Hi, great to see you guys.
Good to see you guys.
And when we come back, thanks for listening to the special edition of the Rich Dad Radio Show, the 50th anniversary of Tricky Dick Nixon taking the dollar off the gold standard, August 15th, 1971. He made us all very rich people. We'll be right back for a wrap-up. Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. The special edition of the Rich Dad Show is the 50th anniversary of Chicken Dick Nixon taking the dollar off the gold standard 50 years ago, August 15th, 1971, and how the insanity has blown up with the biggest bubble in world history. And if history is any guide, is going to be the biggest crash in history. Remember, the bull goes up the stairs. Everybody's happy at the top of a market. But when the bear comes down, that's when people get depressed. So that's why I thank you for listening to the Rich Dad Radio Show. So, Sarah, what are your final thoughts on the show?
Okay, I have one question. Would the debt and tax strategy not be possible if he had reversed that 1971
That's correct.
decision?
Yeah, prior to 1970, please remember, 1950, it made sense to save money. There was called the magic of compounding interest because they weren't printing it. And that people were not in the stock market. And if they're in anything, they're in the bond market. So my rich dad often said to me, because I'll tell you, that guy kept playing the Nifty 50 stocks. And he says, that's a gambler. You see, a real entrepreneur has control. And prior to 1971, you put your money in the bank, like there was control. They didn't print anymore. But today it's completely out of control.
So that moment in history changed the entire trajectory
of the world. Yep.
Wow.
And that's why, you can see a lot of the history of Rich Dad, all the material we put up. I often refer to 1971. And I was on my way to Vietnam. And I got to Vietnam, and 6 months later, in January of 1972, and that's when I started buying gold. And today I'm buying Bitcoin, not at those prices, but I always buy low and sell high. I never sell, but it changed the world. But without my rich dad telling me, watch out in 1971, says the world's going to change. And here we are 50 years later. It is one of the biggest bubbles in world history. And it is a world bubble. Generally, bubbles are local. Mm-hmm. Like in Germany was just for Germany, or Zimbabwe was just Zimbabwe, or whatever it is. Today, it's global.
And is that because the dollar's the reserve currency of the world? Is that why it impacts it so globally? Yeah. It was in 1944 was the Bretton Woods Agreement, just historically. And the U.S. made a promise that said we would back the dollar with gold. And then in 71, they broke the promise. Mm-hmm.
And then it went out of control because the fractional reserve system. See, a bank doesn't even need your savings. You go to the bank, you say, I want to borrow $1,000. They just give it to you because they don't need anything.
Right.
And so now there's a euro dollar, which means it's not the euro, it's a dollar in Europe. They're lending it out. And one of the reasons Japan is a little bit more stable is because their currency is internal. It's a yen. So all of these things is just macroeconomics, which is guys like George Gammon and all that, who I listen to. I got a lot of information from him, and Mark Moss and Peter Schiff, who hates Bitcoin. But anyway, the greatest thing today is we have access to information and smart people outside of the education system. So anyway, welcome to the 50th anniversary of Tricky Dick Nixon taking the U.S. dollar off the gold system. It's going to make some people extremely rich, and it's going to wipe out most people. So please, support, get Kenny's book, Tom's book. Kenny's book is the ABCs of real estate, and Tom's book is Tax-Free Wealth. It's debt and taxes. That's why 1971 and this 50th anniversary are so important. It's debt and taxes. That's Kenny and Tom.